guess we're going to get started. Is that right? Ceremony?
Yes, please get started.
Okay.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome everyone. I think I have got, I know Peter knows probably all of you, right?
Almost all.
Almost all of you. Well, this is the great Peter Carroll, my co-presenter today. And I'm Charles McClintock. I'm officially from Fielding, and Peter is unofficially from Fielding. He's a friend of Fielding.
A friend of Fielding.
For sure. And I'm grateful, as I think you will be, to have him join us today. So, and by the way, if I'm not speaking loudly enough, would you let me know? You can hear me at the other end there? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I'm just thinking it's funny because I had a group of about this size, a little bit larger, at our house over the weekend. We had a retreat for the trustees of the colleges of law, and I'm chairing their board of trustees. And I forgot to say to people as we started that it was a beautiful sunny day and that we have screens on the doors. And so somebody just said, oh, I've got to go look at your garden. And I went right into the screen. So I'm happy to say there are no screens on the doors. If you need to get up, you'll be safe in doing so. I want to thank my boss, or sort of my boss's boss, Katrina, for helping make this happen today too. We have about an hour and 45 minutes according to the schedule. I know that you guys have been tremendously busy, probably all year, but certainly since August and through the next couple of months with all your investee due diligence and meetings and decision making. So the fact that you're here is, we're grateful for that. And we've tried to think about what would be most useful for you. It's not an easy question to answer because you're all different. You have different levels of experience. I don't know how long each of you has been involved with SVP or had other experiences in philanthropy and nonprofits. So what we've done is we have a presentation that tries to hit on some major sort of strategies for investing in the social sector. And I use those terms interchangeably, social sector and nonprofits. We would like this to be hands-on in the sense that the value of it, I think, for you, and certainly for us, is going to be the interaction. So if, when we're presenting these larger sort of strategic views about how do you do investing in the social sector, please say, so how does that apply? How might that apply to investee X who we've been working with or who we're considering working with? That's going to make it meaningful for you, and it's going to make it interesting for us. I think the other thing I would say is that this is a sneak preview, pre-preview of what we would like to develop and hand to Katrina to do when she goes to the SVP conference in October, and you're on the program there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that Fielding is exploring this idea as a model for educational programs throughout the whole network for SVPI. So I will be doing a presentation in October at that conference if any of you are attending that conference. And so this is an inside look. You're right, it's a sneak preview of the kind of model we're hoping to develop more thoroughly, and not just in Santa Barbara, but in other places. And we're thinking if you like this, if this makes sense, it's the right level, it's the right set of expertise that you think you need, then I hope we can offer the same thing again to other partners so that over time we involve all the partners in Santa Barbara. So that's really our plan. And for those of you who don't know Fielding, this is our expertise, is developing education programs for people who are mid-career professionals with more experienced adults. That's what we've focused on for 40 years. So we're really looking forward to doing this. And thank you. I'm glad you're here. And you didn't know it, but you're willing to be guinea pigs. Appreciate that.
It's a good way to start the week. I guess the other, what your remarks made me think is that I'm sort of new to what the details are that you do in Social Venture Partners. I'm aware of the nonprofit world and have taught and consultant and worked in that world for 30 years or so. Less so in the philanthropic world, which is Peter's obviously area of expertise. But in terms of the training that you might need or the education that you feel you need in this group, you know, I would imagine that you would have some kind of activity that you might call onboarding for new investors, or maybe something that you would offer to attract people who you're considering or they're considering joining your group. That's one kind of educational experience. The other would be something that's ongoing for you as you know, experienced members of the group, and that's where you'd say, look, we really want to know more about one of the topics you're going to talk about, impact investing. Could we have another session at some future time where we really get into the details about that? So we've kind of got a blend here of things that might be useful for onboarding, but also we think are useful for you as continuing members, and welcome. I think I have one more packet.
No, I'm not staying, so.
Hi, Mary Beth. I'm Charles.
Charles, I'm really.
That's okay. That's for you. So, the last thing I say before we launch into sort of the formal agenda is, I think I mentioned Peter and I have not done this show together before. And my sense is that perhaps we are two sides of the same coin. We want to take you to the heights. Peter's very good at the heights. But we want to take you through the weeds as well, because it's when you get into the weeds that you discover that all those wonderful concepts and ideas are often more complicated to implement or to use than you might have imagined. So it sometimes falls to me to be the weed guy and Peter to be the mountaintop guy. We'll see how that works out.
You might call it the peaks of the images over there and some of the valleys over there.
I think that's
Visual.
a terrific,
Compliment.
that's a terrific idea too. So, some of you have folded packets, and some of you weren't so lucky because we ran out of folded packets this morning, and you have envelopes. But what you should see, what I'd like you to just focus on for a moment, and I'll share this with you, Peter, if you'd like, is this sort of an overall, this agenda of what we're going to do. And so let me focus on just a couple of pieces here so you'll have a sense of what we're going to do over the next couple of hours. The very first paragraph I think is important because it identifies what we see as the goals, what we would like to do for you. And that is help you think about ways to incubate new ideas, sustain successful programs, scale proven models, and promote system change. And system change is something that we really want to emphasize. I said it's designed for active hands-on, and that's what I mean by you guys speaking up. Okay, that's the hands-on piece of this. So we're going to start with Peter talking about the topic of fusion of art and science and philanthropy, and this is another way of talking about the heights and the weeds, or the art and the science, and I'm going to sort of do the science side, and he's going to sort of do the art side, but we'll give you both sides. On the next page, we'll then, after Peter talks about that for a few moments, we will talk about what I've called evidence-based accountability, which is a strategy for investing and assisting and supporting and helping be successful social sector organizations. And it's really more, it's more of the weeds, and it's more of the sort of technical aspects. Then we're going back to Peter to talk about collective impact and systems, and I will be there to help as well. And if he gets too lofty, I've got some weeds to throw in for you. And then we want to finish up with impact investing, which is something I think some of your partners may have some experience with. On the last page, we have planned, but we haven't sort of confirmed it yet, a second session in November, and we'll be working with Joan to, figure that out, if that's the right date, and if we're, exactly what we're going to do. But just to say, a whole other way of coming at this is to deal with your roles as consultants and coaches on two nonprofits. We have a very successful program at Fielding called Evidence-Based Coaching, and the director of that program, Francine Campone, has done a lot of work in coaching and consulting executive directors and boards and others in the nonprofit sector. And she would, if we go ahead and do that session, which I hope we do, she will join us for that and give you some of the nitty-gritty of how to be an effective executive coach, just to use a term.
Charles, for just a second, one of the things we were thinking about, and we would love your input and feedback, is that this falls within our investment cycle. So by mid-November, we will have chosen our new investees, and we would invite them to join you in this next session as a way to lay the groundwork for your work together with whoever we've chosen as investees. But again, this is just in discussion now, and your input and feedback would be really important to us.
Great, thank you. All right, I think I forgot to introduce Joanna Burns, my assistant at the Institute for Social Innovation. And thank you, Joanna, for joining me early this morning. Packets together. So, Peter, I think you're on.
Which lofty peak am I going to fall off to begin with?
Yeah, we can swap seats if you want.
This is good. Okay. So here's my first question. What would you say is Social Venture Partners' secret sauce? What is the special, unique thing that SVP Partners brings to the social investment philanthropic team? What's our secret sauce?
Outside perspective.
Outside perspective?
A very diverse set of skills.
A very diverse set of skills?
Experience in the real world.
Experience in the real world. Did you just wink at me?
I don't feel that way.
I'll fall off the beat.
Independent judgment.
Independent judgment?
Confidence.
Confidence? That's very good. So that's important because in some ways that represents our point of view. That's our point of departure. And in your packet, you got a lot of pieces of paper in your packet, so I don't think you're going to be able to follow them around. But in your packet is a little one-pager called the Philanthropic Curve.
It should be on the, for those of you who have a packet, it's on the left side.
And in
For
essence,
those of you who don't, you have to dig in.
it's a way that we, that TPI has used for many years of framing the journey that the donor is on. And it starts out with you become a donor. And you become a donor because your family gives, your church asks you to give, because your little sons, little daughters, whatever. And so you begin responding. You become a donor, becomes something that is sort of part of your life. And then over time, you realize you got to get organized. This is like ridiculous. You got 1,800 requests. You got that big pile at the end of the year, what to do with all those envelopes that you keep. So you decide to get organized, and that may mean you will set up a donor advised fund at the Santa Barbara Foundation, or with Fidelity or Schwab or whatever, or you might even get your accounting firm to help you get organized or whatever. And so you decide to get more structurally organized. So at least the flow is handled better. You might even set up a private foundation. But then you realize that's good, that's great, but you're still primarily reactive. You're responsive to the request. Jerry calls you up and say, we bought a table, we're having a fundraiser. So you want to become more strategic. Strategic, that word. And then that's good. But the more you do, the more you realize what you don't know. You really don't know what you need to know. So you have to get focused on issues and results. You have to begin to really do some of the legwork. You have to do research. You have to visit organizations. You have to talk to people in the field. And that's sort of level 4, which is where I would say we're in the main SVP is and wants to be. It's focused on issues and results. And then level 5, you realize what everyone realizes and what Bill and Melinda Gates realized, even with all that money, that you can't do it alone. You've got to get leverage. You've got to bring others in. You just cannot do it alone. And then level 6, when I first did this 20 years ago, I had level 6 was nirvana. And all of my colleagues who are half my age or less said, nirvana, give me a break. So now it's harmony and congruence. So I don't know what that means either. But in your packet is there's a talk that I gave a year and a half ago on the fusion of art and science and philanthropy. And it has since been, several sections of it that have been on the Stanford Social Innovation blog. It's for your reading pleasure later, or your whatever. But in essence, it raises the fundamental question that for many, many reasons, philanthropy is focused on results and impact. And we have been going through what might be called an effectiveness movement to try to really do the work well, really, really well. At the same time, there's been a concern that we have an over-reliance on metrics, over-reliance on data and on evaluation that somehow feels in opposition to a mission-based kind of thing where you're trying to do things from a passion and love perspective. So there's been attacks on this hyper-rational, managerial, that seems counter to creativity. So there's been like a tension between the what I'm calling the science of philanthropy, which is the actual measurement practice, which by the way has history. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Mrs. Harkness, when they set up philanthropy at the turn of the century, had something called scientific philanthropy. And those elements were you do surveys, you identify the problem, all the things that you would do in strategic philanthropy. And interestingly, in scientific philanthropy, this is very interesting, identifying those whose help would be needed or whose opposition must be neutralized. This is 1900.
Nothing new.
Nothing. So, and so all out of the strategic philanthropy word, and when we started TPI in 1989, we used the word strategic philanthropy. Our basic metaphor was, would you invest your money the way you're giving your money away? No way. No way. You wouldn't just give to people who ask you. You would never do that. I mean, Mission Wealth would immediately. So that was our metaphor 20 years ago. But strategic philanthropy was not normative, even as a discussion. It was only the province of large foundations. Over this 20-year period, we've had this immensely incredible focus. Although in reality, is most philanthropy strategic? No. But nonetheless, there has been this over emphasis. So the art side, what is the art side? The art side is what I would say you just said were the secret sauce elements of SVP. The art side is your intuition, what you bring to it, your perception. Everybody here has been in a position where you have had to look at people and say, are these good people? Do I want them in my organization? Do I want them as friends? We all have this intuitive thing, your gut, your passion, and it's sometimes called wisdom. So what is that? Is that science? Is that art? And it really, rubber hits the road when it comes to the question of evaluation. And my colleague Leslie Pine, who has worked with me for now almost 25 years, wrote this about the difficulty of evaluation. There's no denying the types of goals and strategies supported by many foundations can be difficult. Many foundations, many donors, whatever, difficult to evaluate. Costs a lot, lots of pitfalls, and here are some of the few of the hurdles. What is measurable is not always what is most important. And in some cases, what is measured, because it is measurable, can influence outcomes to the detriment of the program. Determining causality can be difficult or impossible. A variety of external factors can influence grant outcomes. We did an incredibly interesting program in Philadelphia about 7 years ago on domestic violence. It was a 3-year program, $2.5 million a year for 3 years, quite ambitious, had several elements. The program went in to educate the court officers, a lot of work with police, a lot of work with neighborhood associations and churches about don't be silent when you hear this, PSA ads. And then we had the program evaluated by the Annenberg School of Communications. And they came back and they said, here are the progress of the indicators we set up. But at the end of the day, we're not sure what this program did, because during that 3-year period, there were some very, very big, high-profile domestic violence incidents in the city that had massive amount of press. So they had trouble determining what was the result of this very discrete, intentional thing, and what really happened. So it's very hard to know. Change may occur over a very long time horizon. We're making 1-year grants, 2-year grants, 3-year grants. What could you do in 3 years? Really do. So it's hard. Getting honest feedback from grantees and others is a real challenge, and SVP has experienced that from the very beginning 10 years ago. It experiences how do you get people to be honest, and then limited time. So these challenges really are an example of, even though you have data and you have inputs and you have outputs and you are measuring, it's very, very hard to do that. You need an interpretive sense. You need an instinctive sense. You need what we call in this little piece a beginner's mind. And this is a very interesting quote. I'm going to run over time, so I'm going to be quick. This is from a Buddhist master, Wu Cheng Man. We do not see, this is the top of the mountain. We do not see the full process of coming into being a social action. We do not see its descending movement from thought and consciousness to language, interpretations, and relationships. We see what we do. We also form theories about how we do things, but we are usually unaware of the place from which we operate when we act. So this is really setting up what is a very interesting thing. We know we want data. We know that evidence-based decision-making is better, but we need to put it in a different context. The best writing on this that I've seen comes from a man named Donald Schoen, who taught at MIT for many years. He happened to also have been a West Newton, Massachusetts neighbor and a friend of mine. But he talked about what he called the reflective practitioner. He's also, by the one who came up with the term a learning society, a learning organization. And he thinks that there's a knowledge inherent in practice that should be understood as an artful doing. And what you don't want, and this is the key line, you don't want relevance subject to rigor. You don't want substance and content bounced around by mechanical, artificially determined metrics, even if they're the best metrics. So that is the fundamental balance between art and science. And then there's also an interesting article that was in the Harvard Business School that's cited here about when should a process be art and not science. And one of the stories is about the building of the Steinway piano. Okay? 95% of that piano is mass manufactured. However, the soundboard is distinctive, is different, is original. So when Steinway is working with Charles, who's not a concert pianist, but a hell of a good pianist, wants to get that piano right to his ear. They sit with that artist, and they bring up a dozen soundboards. That's the art. So they can do almost everything. Another example they give is minute clinics, these minute clinics that you go into to get the 2,000 around the country. You go in and, like a outpatient emergency room kind of thing. Everything is there is programmed out of very, very specific instructions to the practitioner, who's a nurse, not a physician, about what to do. But at the end of the day, they say, when you've seen all this, put it away and look at that person. What do you see? What do you see? So there's an art there. So what do you do with all this? Well, here are a couple of examples of how the fusion of art and science. Ron Heifetz and Martin Linsky, writers who you may know, who talk about adaptive leadership, says this: the stakeholders themselves must create and put the solution into effect, since this problem is rooted in their attitudes and priorities and behavior. Until stakeholders change their outlook, a solution cannot emerge. What does that mean to SVP? It means you can go in there with the best team in the world and the best intentions, but you cannot solve that problem. The group, the client, has to solve the problem. Otherwise, you walk away and you may have a great 20-page plan. You have not done anything. IDEO, the organization which many of you know about, they are trying to get an intuitive understanding of client and customer needs in order to create human-centered, what they call human-centered products and services. Dev Patnia, the ability to emphasize and have a gut connection to the people you serve allows an organization to do truly transformative work. That gut. And then I'll end with this. What do you do differently? What do we do differently? I was looking at the SVP form, the feedback form from when you thank you, do this. What else would you do? I think you might ask a couple of different questions. What is going on in the work and what you see that you intuitively feel but can't measure? Maybe can't even articulate. What is the emotional investment you sense in the work? What's the emotion in the work? Is there a passion in that work? And what are the reflective barriers? And then lastly, how well and how deeply have we listened? And have we really, really listened deeply? So that's a little bit of the art and a tiny bit of the science.
Some responses or questions.
Does this resonate? Does this?
I think it's really important. I mean, I think we're trained oftentimes to use our cognitive skills, and in doing so, we've lost touch with some of our innate abilities to sense what's going on. And so, just that reminder of making sure we take time to relate to people at that real, deeper, conscious human level, I think, is where lies a lot of the opportunity for transformation.
Yeah, I think also that focus on them solving their problems. And they can't do it, which is from our backgrounds, and that a lot of us, right, get in and we want to fix things, right? And be able to step back and let them do it is something you've got to be cognizant of.
One of my best teachers in this whole field is a woman named Melinda Marble. Who has said for years that the people at the center of the problem you're trying to solve have to be at the center of the solution. And that sounds so right, Jerry. It is amazing how few philanthropies operate that way.
Yeah.
That's a good red flag that we're looking for, somebody that wants us to solve their problem.
Exactly right.
My concern is that the pendulum just keeps swinging. So now we're in this evidence-based, and we kind of throw away those feel good, the heart connections. And then we're going to get to a point where it's way too clinical, and we swing back, and it's going to be about the kids. It's about the kid, and then we stop thinking. I mean, so the art and the sciences that can melded together, then you really don't have a chance at a fair.
Right. And of course, you get from nonprofits incredible pushback. What is all this stuff? All this work? Who's going to pay for this? We're spending more time giving you reports than we are helping the kids. So it is a very interesting, and I think social venture partners, because of the very nature of it, it's not our money, it's the team, it's the people, are in a better position really to handle this than, let's say, when you're simply writing a check to a community owner. Okay.
Okay, we should move on, just in the interest of time, not in the interest of the importance of the time. Thank you very much, Peter. You mentioned that I play piano, and again, you almost know Duke Ellington and some of his repertoire, but one of his famous songs is, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." Way.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Use that line.
Yes, that's what I'm writing.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the pendulum, because I think about the pendulum all the time, and I'm one of those evidence-based, by training and by nature, those evidence-based evaluation, accountability kind of guys, but I have my limits with that stuff, believe you me. And when accountability started to hit higher education in a bigger way in the last 10 years or so, I said, don't worry about it. Stop feeling like we got to jump through all these hoops about learning outcomes and all that sort of stuff. The pendulum will swing back, and we won't have had to waste all that time doing all this sort of nitty-gritty, in-the-weeds work. I've been wrong so far. I don't know why the pendulum hasn't swung back, and it's an interesting question that we ought to think about. But it does seem to me we have been on for at least 10 years, maybe 20 in the social sector, and probably 5 to 10 years intensive in the higher ed sector, an accountability push. And I don't see any relief coming in the near future. You guys can practice the way you want to practice, and I hope you practice in the sense of fusing art and science. Somebody really wants a reservation for that.
Yeah, thanks, John. Just pick it up and hang on.
So, on the assumption that the pendulum is going to be where it is, and it's going to stay on this sort of accountability side of things, I want to talk a little bit about that and, talk to you about, well, if, in terms of the fix things mentality, what are some of the things that you might want to try to get your investees to fix? Not that you can fix them, but that you might be pushing them to fix. And these are not unreasonable things to do, and Peter's not saying that they are either. You kind of can't get away from trying to run a good ship. So how do we run a good ship in the nonprofit sector? So I would like you to look in your files of paper for a diagram that looks like this. It's an example of a program model in foster care. And I do apologize to you for all the papers. We just didn't quite get it together in time to make this simple. How many of you know the term program model, theory of change, logic model? Raise a hand. I see one here. 2, 3. Okay. Well, that's what this is all about. If it was in the business world, they'd say, well, what's your business? What are you selling? What's your service? What are you selling? And I want to just quickly show you what this entails in the social sector, and then show you how it would be used to fit into an accountability or evidence-based approach. And by the way, the nonprofit sector, and Peter knows the statistics more on this than I do, but when you look at the major investments in philanthropy, they go to religion first, probably higher ed.
One third of all charitable giving goes to
religious organizations. Then you've got healthcare, hospitals, higher ed, probably up there. The arts, we know in Santa Barbara that a lot of money's gone into the Granada and now the wonderful new Vic. Big money raising. And then you've got a lot of everything else, and I call these the sort of human service organizations. These are the folks that are trying to deal with poverty and poverty-related problems. They're the smallest and the most underfed organizations, and sometimes we ask them to do the most. I wish it were otherwise, but it is sort of the way it is. So I've been doing some work with a foundation, an East Coast-based foundation called the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation. They're very interested in youth development. And in particular, they're interested in foster care and how kids transition out of foster care. And these are kids with very tough lives, as you can imagine. So if you look at that chart, what the Clark Foundation and many other foundations and other philanthropy organizations are asking nonprofits to do is, first of all, say, just tell us, look on the left-hand side, just tell us what your goal is. And you'd be surprised if you get 5 folks, an executive director and the 2 associates and a board member, and they'll all give you a different response to that question. And it takes some good consulting and some good coaching to help them become clear what is the goal. So improve foster care youth's academic achievement, leading to self-sufficiency. Now, there's a lot in those words, but at least it crisply says what we're about, and it gives you a guide when you're out there trying to tell the story. Target population. A lot of nonprofits are chasing dollars, and so they pick up a new grant to hit a new group of kids. Is this the group we're really primarily concerned about, or did we just need that grant for $75,000? So you work with a nonprofit to say, become more focused. Who are you really trying to help? So in this case, foster care, kids in foster care ages 12 to 18, and who are at risk of academic failure. So that's information that they need to have about who they're trying to serve. The big column in the middle, program components. So this is what they do day in and day out. And again, you will find that a lot of what an organization does, and I would say this is not just nonprofit organizations, but maybe any organization, it's just what they've always done. And they're invested in what they've always done, and they keep doing it. They keep getting the funding to do it, whether it's from, in the case of foster care, some government money, or foundations, or other donors who want them to keep doing what they've done. Is that what they should be doing to produce the results? Not necessarily. So you try to help an organization be clear about how it's devoting its energy to achieve that goal. So I just gave you some examples there. Academic remediation being one set of things they would do, academic case management being another, and post-foster care services. And look up at the top box, the academic remediation, next to the top box. This is very critical. Well, we have tutors that help the kids. What's their caseload? 30 kids. How are they doing? They're burned out. Okay, so what's a reasonable caseload? And so you begin to set a set of standards here that's going to hopefully make this organization effective when it's trying to do. How much time do they spend with the kids? Turns out they got to have at least 6 hours a week. How many weeks? At least 90 days. Hopefully a full year. And you're gathering this information from a variety of sources, but you're trying to say this is really what you should be aspiring to do if you're going to be effective. And then expected outcomes. And this raises a whole question then of how do you measure these, how do you get the information on these, and that's where you get into the evaluation issues that Peter mentioned. On the second page, I think I'm going to skip that for now, but it's just a matter of saying that this program model should be based on assumptions and beliefs about the nature of the problem. This is sort of on the art side of things. And what are our values, what are our assumptions, and what are our beliefs? And then ideally, you base the design of this model on research or best practices in the field. And it turns out in foster care, there's a lot of research. Some of it is quite good about what works and what doesn't. Helping an organization become clear about its program model is an enormous asset to that organization. And that is sort of the consulting and coaching process. There's a lot to it, and any future time we could get into it in great depth. And I've done it with a number of organizations, and they feel grateful that they can finally look at their program in a different way.
Charles, do you have to be knowledgeable in that program area to,
It helps a great deal. If you take foster care, there's a history to it, legislative history, cultural history. You know, in the United States, our social policy is a mishmash of things. We don't have a sort of coordinated national policy. So in the area of foster care, half a dozen states have progressive legislation that allow, you have to leave foster care when you're 18, but now you can have transitional services after that. Well, if you don't know that, you're going to be in a little more difficult situation. So it certainly helps to have that information. On the other hand, in the era of the internet and Wikipedia and so forth, if you need to get up to speed, you can. And it's probably wise that you.
how many of the SVP engagements would you say entered the program content area as a part of what the SVP has done?
Like I was saying, you're thinking, I wonder if it's helpful just as an architecture, so you could ask questions that help people think about their program more specifically. So you wouldn't have to necessarily be an expert to at least ask the first line fundamental questions. Not sure.
I would think that all of them have some program element because we've been drawn in either through the program or the anticipated outcome. And we have to understand some of the programming as well as some of the intention in order to help them strategically shift things to whatever goals they've decided they want to have.
Well, let me echo that. I think that, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oftentimes it really helps or we help them to focus on their program because they don't ask these questions of themselves. But oftentimes what we're brought in for is not necessarily to modify the program or even to impact the program, but to work with the stakeholders of the program. Now there have been times when we've worked specifically with programs like Good Cookie or some of the other similar programs, but generally it's we need help with our board or with our staff or getting people talking to each other, whatever it is, not specifically with the program.
And when you say stakeholders, you mean the board, the staff?
Yeah, the staff and the organization. Typically, they have issues and
You've seen that?
You've seen it.
No, I was just going to say, a point that you brought up is that if you ask a board member, say the EDB, the development director, all what the goal is, and they all have, they really don't know the goal. So I think that it's really, what we can do is get them to focus and to have everybody come together on what the goal is, instead of having all these different variations, which I've just had the privilege of working with.
With one of your investees?
Yes.
Which can be named?
New Beginnings.
New Beginnings. And what is that?
It is a zone help.
They call themselves, so it's really interesting. They're a great example of what they say they are and what they actually do. So they're called New Beginnings Counseling Center. So you think, oh, they counsel people. Well, what they actually do is provide limited case management services for an underserved and homeless population. So they help with presenting issues around a particular individual or group of people. For example, a client who's living in Section 8 housing was a hoarder. She would be at risk for losing her Section 8 housing if she continues to hoard. So New Beginnings provides wraparound services to help her hoard less so that she keeps her Section 8 housing. They don't address the underlying issues, which you would think of when you say counseling, but they don't address the underlying issues that compel her to hoard.
I would make a case that for SVP to not, in some manner, address the program quality, even though what you've been asked to do, what you've been asked to do is to help with the board and the money, whatever, is a failure. And therefore, one way to do it would be to, in the questionnaire, to say, on what theory have you based your program work? What, and what evidence do you have that it is working? And does it represent in your mind best practice? I mean, just some, I mean, I think you want to know that, because one thing that could happen, and I've seen happen, you get an organization to be really high performing, it turns out what they're doing is not good for the clients that they're serving. We don't want it, that's a moral hazard. We don't want it.
But in a funny way, this program goal, I'm thinking about I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, and they all have something called a mission statement, okay, which is really the same thing. But they're forever tweaking it. You know, it's never, every year there's a board retreat where they spend 4 hours talking about this 3 sentences, and nobody can agree. Then they go out, and even though the mission statement is changed and it's there, you still have people seeing it differently. So it's very subjective, you know, and that's the thing which I think is hard, you know, the ED sees it some way, but each board member sees it another way. And so it's very hard to consolidate this into the real thing.
It is, and here's what would be different for use strategy, an evidence-based accountability strategy with that kind of a problem. We're not going to tweak it this year unless we've got evidence that says we should tweak it. It's not that we just don't like the word. Show me the data that the word is the wrong word. Otherwise, let's stay with where it is, or let's ask what evidence do we have that what it is. And that's a key thing that you could be asking your investees to do. Because you're right, it becomes sort of an exercise, I don't know if it'll be off color, but an autoerotic exercise here where we say, let's make the mission statement again. I always really like that.
So could I just have a little pushback, or maybe just a question? You know, we insinuate ourselves into these organizations. We give them some money, they want the money, and they maybe are looking for mentorship or guidance or whatever, but oftentimes we're outsiders. And, you know, so let's say somebody approaches us and said, I need board development help or something, and we come and we go, right, let's talk about your mission statement. They're like, you're outsider here, right? I mean, this is an uncomfortable conversation, and it maybe not the first thing we should bring up. So how do you handle this?
Well, my response to that would be, Peter may have one too, or actually I'll give you my response and then somebody else around the table should respond. You have to decide where to enter. You have to do some sort of diagnosis or, what's your process called? Due diligence.
Due diligence.
To figure out whether that's going to be something you take on or not. It would depend on, you know, if this is one of your investees, whether you feel comfortable doing that or not. There are many entry points that can still get you back to the same place. I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but how would somebody else answer?
I would say in the process of even doing strategic planning for an organization, you don't start at the mission statement trying to get the words, because everybody's individual perception of that or subjectivity creates a different interpretation of what those words mean. And you have, therefore, specific goals and objectives and strategies and tactics that lead up to that mission statement. And by defining what those specific objectives are, it creates a single interpretation of that mission statement. And I've seen that be a missing element of, we have this mission statement to do this big lofty goal, but there's no specific objectives, which are these outcomes. And even more specific than that, how do we achieve those outcomes and then delve into that. So this model I like, but it addresses some of those key elements that lead up to that single statement.
So I agree with everything you said, 100%. but here's my issue. You know, we get invited in typically to solve a specific set of problems, or what the organization perceives as a specific set of problems, and that may not be their mission or their interpretation of their mission. And as an outsider, you can't just come in and say to the organization, okay, let's get everybody in the room and talk about your objective. Like, look, tell us how to raise some money, or tell us how to work together. You know what I mean? Like, we have to tread carefully here. We can't come in and be the big bosses.
it's,
I
That's
can
all I'm
be
saying.
opinionated, but the organization that I work with is, let's sit down, so I work more on the financial side.
Yeah.
And it's, okay, we need to raise money.
Right.
Well, how does that correlate? How does every number or dollar that flows to the organization correlate to a specific outcome? Well, what are the outcomes you're looking for? And we just spend time talking about, and it's not that I kind of avoid the mission statement, not consciously, but I like to focus on results and outcomes. And then how do the dollars link to that outcome? And it just tends to organically create this easy conversation
Yeah.
that isn't so resistant. It's just a conversation that, whether they're honest or not, I don't know, but they kind of talk about what they want to achieve and then how those dollars kind of flow through. And then if they start seeing, well, these dollars really don't link to that outcome, so why do we have those dollars? And then we can start refining budgets.
The
Focus
response
on their
time here.
outcomes.
Do you wanna say something?
Yeah, I was thinking about last week at the Fast Pitch. I went and sat with the Environmental Defense Center, and one of the things that they wanted to, they want advice and guidance on launching a hotline program. Well, that sounds great. They want strategic advice and funding and how to put this together and so on, but it immediately emerged, well, how does this fit with your other programs? And how do you think this is helping you get closer to your goals about developing sort of citizen activist network and so it began to immediately sort of come into all these other pretty substantial programmatic issues around their outcomes that they want, and it just developed naturally, I think. And so maybe one of the things is for us to be prepared to ask the questions, because these things will come up. But I appreciate David's point. You don't want to go in and just start mucking about, right? It can't be top down, but it definitely needs us to be prepared to have the conversations, going back to the self-reflective part of this, being really intentional about how we engage.
Charles, I think David is asking a portion of a question that's on the spectrum of SVP investing, and Katrina is filling in a portion about the due diligence as well. And I think all of it is part of the SVP coaching that we're looking to get from you all, because it's not just about sussing out what the organization needs, understanding their programming, understanding the gaps in the program, understanding their culture, but it's also for us understanding ourselves, understanding the power that we bring when we walk into that boardroom, and the unequal power dynamic that we bring when we come in there, and to be careful about that. So I think it's all of these things and much more that we're hoping to get from your work with us.
Well, I would say that much of this is not what you need from your work with Fielding or anyone. It's some internal decisions about what kind of relationships you want to enter into, and what is the criteria where you feel comfortable. Perhaps you don't want to go into a situation where you've been given such a narrow slice, you're not sure, it just doesn't feel right. You may be looking for the one which has more ability, where they welcome that dialogue. So I think it's partly an internal investment policy process, as well as once you've decided to do that, then how do you do it?
So are you saying that as part of our due diligence, we really need to look at the receptivity of the organization to answer the kinds of questions we feel we need to answer?
One of the things that you see is there's a readiness, or there isn't.
Right, right.
For all of us. And if the organization is ready for this, great. If it isn't, you're going to be frustrated all around.
So I have a question I guess I've had a very frustrating time working with an organization who says they want our help, and then you go in to help and they go, oh, well, we don't have time to do that. For board development, you put together a plan. Oh, well, there's just a couple of us and, we don't have time. We don't have time, partly to answer the phones. Or if you go in and you bring in some other people to help them, and they go, well, maybe they'll really listen. So what does one do in that situation?
They to me are not ready.
Well, maybe it was a bad choice. And bad investment,
Or
which
maybe
you have to
that-
accept will happen. Excuse me.
That team might need to reconvene. I think one of the problems we've had
Mhm.
with less than completely successful engagements is that the team wasn't on the same
Right.
Which
The-
team?
the
Which team?
SVT.
Yes.
The
The
SVT.
Oh,
SVT
the
team.
SVT.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because we've had a difference of opinion, where there'll be a partner that's fully engaged and says, it's all good, let's keep going. There'll be a partner that voices their hesitation to go forward. If those two partners don't get together, we don't really have the full picture, and there's
Yeah.
usually more than two
Right,
parties. But I think
Right.
it's essential to sort of reconvene as an SVP to say,
right.
okay, this is my experience, like to your point, we bring various levels of
Right.
intuition and perspective and experience, and somebody's seeing something or it's playing to something that they really, really want to help with. And
I think also we get so emotionally involved,
Mhm.
as hard as we try to be objective and everything. I've never seen any of us that haven't been drug in with our, with the caring and passion and appreciation of what they do. And I think one of the things we kind of suffer from is we're not willing to cut the rope. And it's maybe a case like that, we should actually walk away, but boy, that's hard to do. I mean, I've done it once, and it was hard, and even the client was okay with doing it that way, but still, you get involved.
But there is this interesting, you bring up that you have to work on your own stuff, our own stuff.
Mhm.
So we're together as a team.
Mhm.
And one of the problems there is that's more time, that's another, there's a huge time process. But you really do need to do that. I think you, and I know the process as it is, attempts to be clear that this is a good fit. Perhaps more.
To overuse a phrase, it takes a village to change an organization.
Yeah.
And so you do have to be together as the village. In the interest of time, this is great conversation, and I really appreciate your asking these questions. As always, we're under time pressure, and I want to show you one other thing that might be of use and relevant to these kinds of questions about sort of where can you enter, variety of entry points. If you'll turn to the document that looks like this. It says rubric for assessing capacity for evidence-based practice. Well,
This is
there's
exciting.
an exciting title.
With an asterisk.
Rubric. You'll see on the top row, program model, that's what we just talked about. And other terms are used for that, theory of change is sometimes used. If you look down the left-hand side, these are elements, according to the expert McClintock there at the bottom, of what being an evidence-based organization would require. And they can be individually or in groups, points of entry for you when you're taking this accountability sort of strategy. So the program model is one point of entry where you try to help them be clear about that. If that's not where they want to be, or they've already perhaps achieved that, because you can see as you read across, they can be at a basic level, a promising level, or an exemplary level. Maybe they've already done that work. Maybe they've already had a consultant to help them with that. Another major problem is aligning that program model with their actual organization and implementing it. And again, you'll find that many organizations don't do that, or they don't do it very, very systematically. Why? Because Mary, who does our intake process, has been with us for 25 years, and we don't know how to get rid of Mary, but we need to get rid of Mary because she's not doing the intake that we need in order to get the information that we need to track our clients. Okay? All right. Metrics, another point of entry. Instead of asking, I think somebody suggested, what's your model? You can say, what are your outcomes? Tell me about your successes. And start there. And then move back. Well, how did you know that was a success? And where has it been written up? The metrics don't have to always be numbers. They don't always have to be quantitative. They can be case studies. They can be stories. They need to be true, but they can be in that form. A big point of investing in human service organizations is to help them with their information systems. Somebody developed a spreadsheet because he was clever, and that's what we do our intake on, and that's how we decide who's gotten the services, and that's where we put in our satisfaction surveys and that sort of thing. Well, you all know what I'm talking about. That might be fine, it might need some work. Peter's point, reflection and action. This is a very important point for a lot of philanthropy. It's a very big point in our world of higher education right now in terms of our accreditors. Yes, they want us to be gathering data on learning outcomes, but even more than that, they want us to be talking about that information. They want to see, where does the board meet? And how often does the board talk to the organization about how are things going? How are we doing? What are our successes? What are our failures? What do we want to do about the less than successful things that we're doing? Do we need more money, or do we need to reorganize? Do we need to make some staffing changes? What do we need? And it's that process of talking about how we're doing that is very, very important, and that often just doesn't happen. And probably doesn't happen with most boards, is my guess. Business alignment with the program model. The program model needs to have some way of generating revenue, and if it doesn't, then you're in trouble. And aligning the revenue flow with the program model and making sure they're aligned is another point of entry. I'm using the term marketing, public relations. How do we tell our story? And then a term that I got from another source, the one listed at the bottom of the page, high engagement philanthropy, is how to help an organization develop an internal culture of philanthropy or culture of development. Do you have a good story to tell? Do you tell it consistently? Do you have a board that knows how to tell a story and knows how to help you with the treasurer and revenue? Do you have an executive director who knows how to do it? Every staff member in the organization should be a development director or a philanthropist, be able to tell the story, talk about it with confidence, and that's sort of the ultimate goal that you see. So I leave you with this then as a set of examples of points of entry for a kind of evidence-based accountability strategy for doing the work. Final thoughts before we move on to Peter's next section.
Well, some of these are areas unto themselves. I mean, if you think about measuring outcomes, I mean, some people spend their lives trying to figure out how you measure outcomes in a nonprofit because it's so much more difficult than just measuring the bottom line for profit. And what is the measure? So that's a very complicated theoretical place in and of itself.
And can be expensive.
Yeah. And so it's.
They say if you're going to do a reasonable evaluation of any organization, it should probably cost 10 to 15% of their annual budget.
And who can do that?
Yeah, who can do that? You need extra money to do that. I will say that there's one foundation that I was told about, and this is back, I think, in the youth development area, who now says, you're not going to get any money from us. We're actually going to tell you which 4 outcomes to measure. We've already done our due diligence. We know that these are the 4 things that matter to youth development. And if you want to get our investment, you will measure those 4 things.
Yeah, and certain foundations now, everything's gotten a lot more sophisticated. The funding organizations are often not going to give the money anymore unless there are certain measured outcomes, and it's getting more and more complicated.
That's the old pendulum.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's the pendulum problem.
Yeah.
So could I just put in a word on the other side of the pendulum? My wife was a professional nonprofit administrator. She ran, amongst other things, a food bank. And they give out food. People don't take food from the food bank unless they're hungry, most people. And these foundations would come along and say, what are your metrics? Like, well, we're giving out food. I don't know. It's fresh food. We get the food from Sefer, we give it out. We're crazy. We need reports. We need spreadsheets. Like, come on, it's a food bank, right? So let's not go crazy with the metrics.
Right. It depends, right? Because that's obviously the metrics on that are significantly different than the metrics of we help in transitional housing, right? So you'd say, okay, we got these kids out. We've got, X number are enlisted in the military, X number are working in trade school maybe, or just working, and X number are in secondary or post-secondary education. You can easily measure those.
I'm not saying don't do metrics, John. I'm just saying don't get so caught up in the
Yeah,
metrics
yeah.
that we have to measure everything and lose sight of the fact that sometimes, you know,
Which is
so-
No, I mean the outside world is caught up in it. I
Yeah,
don't mean
no,
that
no,
we have to
exactly.
be.
Exactly,
It's just that
exactly.
I think nonprofits and for-profits are, you know, that line is becoming less and less distinguishable. Because as the nonprofit world moves up in sophistication and need to target and be better organizations, they come closer to acting like for-profit organizations. So I think it becomes even more complicated. And I see, I've been looking at organizations for 20 years, and so I see them getting much better at what they do. It's absolutely amazing. So that's what I see.
I think that's an interesting point, and as much as I said I was a weeds guy and accountability guy, I also have, I'm always ambivalent about everything, I'm sorry.
Are you sure of that? Sometimes you're ambivalent.
I talked to my wife about that. But I will say that as much as I like it and also resist it, I do believe that it produces better run organizations, as long as it's not taken to an absurd extreme. And Peter said the same thing. Of course, you want your organizations to be well managed and well run and rationally thought through. All right, so now we're going with, so we've done art and science as the overarching concept. We've looked at one strategic aspect of investing, the evidence-based accountability approach, and now we want to talk about another very significant perspective of systems and collective impact.
Which actually, we've begun the conversation by the comment a moment ago that the nonprofit and for-profit world is blurring in so many ways, and the silos are coming down in a manner. So the whole notion of collaboration, the whole notion of systems thinking or systems, to a large degree, SVP has built its whole 10-year history around helping organizations. That's, when it works, that's what it does, and it has been able to be successful. So what's wrong with that? I guess there's nothing at all wrong with that, except every organization, as we already alluded, is a system to come in and say, fix my board, you know, or do this, without getting engaged in the broader picture. We've already talked about what challenges that is. So it does come down to a question of, can you be more, can you think about developing things from a systemic perspective. So at the very least, what could we do? We could ask each organization we're working with or thinking of working with, to what extent do you think collaboratively with other people doing the same thing? To what extent do you view yourself as part of a system? Where do you think you fit in that system? So we could just very easily help expand that. But in Santa Barbara, and I gave a presentation to the Philanthropy Roundtable that's become a working group, that I don't know, maybe perhaps some of you were there, around how do you take a community that loves its nonprofits to think more systemically. And to some degree, why do you care? Well, you care because any one organization is limited in what it can do, period. Silos, people are in silos. They pursue their own manifest destiny. The issues and the problems are vast with multiple actors. No one issue that an organization addresses is of any simple thing. And then long-term solutions require sustainability. So system change. What is a system? Simply put, a system is an organized collection of parts. You have this to look at later or whatever, or subsystems that are highly integrated to accomplish an overall goal. Every organization obviously is a system, but when you're talking about a broader piece, so system change elements, what would you be looking for if you wanted to approach as, let's say, C3H's, and let's say Thrive, which some of you have had contact with, aspires to do? what you're looking for is how would it look different? If you were dealing with homelessness or housing environment, what system of care would look different that we'd want? What would we like to see overall? What local service delivery process and infrastructure changes would be necessary? What do you have to change? What are the elements that change? Do stakeholders have a shared vision of how to accomplish change? And what steps will build consensus among stakeholders and engage them more fully? The other thing about a system is that you're trying to develop sustainability, especially in a universe where the economics are so fragile, and the economic plan of most nonprofits really don't hang together. If you approach it from a system perspective, where you have more actors, could you keep programs going, and could you keep them going with more strength? And I think there are really three elements to system change that fit SVP. One is context. One is knowing enough about the area you're trying to address, having mapped what the resources are, having understood what the data is around, whether it be around foster care or whatever it is, that you become knowledgeable, you know these things. And the more context you have, the better able you to understand the big picture. And obviously, this is an infinite. Context is infinite, but within the scope of what you're trying to do and to the scale of the amount of resources you're putting in. The second aspect of system change is coherence. You now have your data. You now have your information. You've done your research. You've talked to people. You know who the good organizations are. Now you try to put it together. You try to make it coherent. You try to find, and this is especially true in any philanthropy, that gap or that moment where you can come in with the resources you've got and actually do something. So where do you find, how do you make that selection? And then the third aspect to system change is what we've talked about before, is reflection. Most of you have had contact with collective impact, the notion of collective impact. And we've got a one-pager that kind of talks about the notion of collective impact. Collective impact is a made-up term. It used to be called multi-sector partnerships. It certainly evolved out of a concept of collaboration. And I'm on the board of an organization that has had two major multi-sector partnerships going for 10 years. One on fisheries in the North Atlantic, and another around child nutrition issues in a province in India. And in those programs, all the actors who affected those things in India, the corporations, the government, the nonprofits, outside funding, have been brought together over a period of time to work on child malnutrition in that province, have made great progress. In the fisheries issues, major coalition of the 10 largest agribusinesses that are in the fishery business, the various ministries from the countries surrounding the North Atlantic that affect that, various World Bank and World people involved. So these have been very long-term multi-sector collaborations. Collective impact sort of wraps all this, and it has come up with a rubric of what they feel you can get to a position of taking a big issue like homelessness and housing, like helping every child achieve a destiny and accounting. And their 5 conditions are a common agenda. You've got to first have a common agenda. You've got to have shared measurement assumptions. You need to have data that you all agree and that you act by. You need to do something which is the most complicated of all. And in the one instance here in Santa Barbara, I've been deeply engaged with Thrive, You've got to have mutually reinforcing activities. That never happened with Thrive. We never could get the overall group together in a way that they really were doing things together. Continuous communication, which is very expensive to do and very hard to do. The communication piece is probably putting the message together, but it's almost more getting the time and attention of the participants. People are so busy. They take it if you need to absorb. And then you need to have a dedicated staff. You need backbone support. And this creates what is a better system. And I was interested in taking the collective impact common agenda and comparing it to a piece that TPI did 10 years ago on donor collaboration. And here's what we have here. What do successful collaborations look like? The term of this massive collective impact under a diverse group of funders that helps to bring credibility, new ideas, and funding to the effort. We need the actors. An inclusive participation structure encourages participation that might involve local and national foundations. 10 years ago, we didn't mention government, we didn't mention business. Interesting. Time for planning, especially at the outset. This is a big one. You need it. A comfortable interactive forum where people can learn from each other. Flexibility, you need flexibility. Appropriate staffing, it doesn't say you need core staffing. Stability, and then long-term agenda. Real change takes time. My mentor in this business was a guy named Mike Sviridov, who was at the Ford Foundation for many years. And he used to say, remember, change is incremental at best. And he waved his hand. Very, very true. And then lastly, which is interesting, and this isn't in the collective impact rhetoric, trust. Trust. We need trust. And the building of trust, the building of community organization, the building of a community of interest is really, really very, very complicated. So my sense is from SVP's perspective, there's an aspect of trying to do something systemic that I think is unnatural for SVP. In other words, there is the ability to get into the weeds and go in and help fix something. And I remember, what was the deal we had where someone spent 300 hours putting together
500 hours putting
Millbridge.
together financials.
Building the accounting system.
And that was really one person.
One person.
500 hours. God bless. He went away. He never came back.
He's still alive.
He's still alive. And I think, and there's no question that was great, and there's no question that helping individual organizations. But there's something about the SVP membership, certainly in Santa Barbara, where we could really look at systems. And we could be of great benefit to this community, which has had difficulty. So I think that's very, very interesting. But beyond that, I think with every deal we do, we could add to our questionnaire, add to our line of inquiry. How are you connected to others in this business? Do you talk? Are you connected? We could even provide some money to you. We could even say, well, let's get everybody who works in the youth arena that we're interested in together. Let's provide some money so that you can come together for a couple of days. Perhaps even bring in expert or whatever resources. Help you think about whether you could, in fact, do things. I think this could be an exciting model. And of course, SVPI internationally is beginning to try to do exactly this kind of thing. So,
I'm going to chime in a minute on the same topic.
I'm exhausted. Chime in.
Well, let me ask you all to chime in if you'd like first.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you have been involved with Thrive, but many of the organizations who are typical in Santa Barbara, everyone works in silos. And that's kind of nationwide, but definitely here in Santa Barbara.
few organizations, C3H, started working together, Thrive, Institute of New in the last couple of years. But in other organizations, they still feel extremely competitive, and that thought of sharing information about how to have better outcomes, best practices, I just feel a lot of resistance. How can SVP, with asking questions and even aside from money, help encourage that conversation?
Well, you know, this very question came up with the Philanthropy Roundtable. Philanthropy Roundtable, as you know, is a group of foundations, and then the corporate roundtable that you've been key doing. I think one thing you could do is that we could say, if you're willing to sit down with others, we'll fund that. I mean, we will reward that very behavior. And thus you can incentivize, and you can also help people know how to do that. You can bring in the kind of resources, fielding or whatever, to help organizations think about that. So I think this is the contradiction of what we do. We want to build high-performing nonprofit organizations, which are competitive and then take market share, right? That's right out of our market economy. You know, God, like the thing the Pope just said is not good. So there's something about that that isn't right. And it's interesting, the food bank, you mentioned the food bank. The food bank in Santa Barbara has been amazing in terms of it becoming, it still is a food bank, it's what it does. But its thinking is how do we help people eat healthier? What do we do about food scarcity? How do we solve that problem? So they're trying to do that. And they have involved several hundred other organizations in a manner that enabled them to be, somehow they've solved that. So I don't know, Diana. It's a very interesting question.
But there's also a cultural problem there, because the culture of these organizations keeps them in that silo because they don't want to give away their tricks. They don't want anybody to know what's really going on there. What is their, yeah, and funding especially.
Right.
You know, they're so afraid they're going to lose their biggest donors to that other organization. I've been there. I mean,
Right.
we tried, in Telluride, we tried to do this. We tried to get some small organizations to collaborate just on their back office stuff. Just because they were spending so much money on their financial stuff, and they wouldn't do it. They absolutely wouldn't do it.
I was the ED of a small nonprofit, and we were told by our large funder that we were going to have to start collaborating. They had come, and it was Hewlett Foundation, they had come to this systemic approach. And we were quite resistant until we got in the room. And that's exactly what we, first we needed to be encouraged to do it. We needed to be educated as to why it mattered and why it would actually be better for us in the long run. And then we needed to see other people at the table also having to do the same thing. And then we were all rewarded. And although that sounds like a stick, not a carrot, the carrot was really if you allow yourself to engage in this kind of learning and conversation, you're going to get to your goals faster and more coordinated. And it was really true. But you're right, it's very hard to do.
It's education.
Plus, we have to educate other donors in this community that they should be, that a collaborative approach will give us everyone more leverage. We have to make the case, because if I'm worried about my little donor pool and you're worried about yours, because the donors, basically like you and me, that doesn't work either. In other words, the donors have to be in collaboration also. And that's maybe the harder issue for SVP, is how could we make that?
Well, we are a donor, but I think the Philanthropy Roundtable, I don't know whether the corporate roundtable has had this discussion or not, but the Philanthropy Roundtable is very intrigued with how they can develop donor strategy and process that leads to greater systemic action. And I think your story is a great story. And every time we have been involved in trying to pull organizations together, the thing that has driven them, the money is like everywhere, but can we really do this work better? Can we achieve our mission
And
I
what-
mean,
and the
if we
argument-
can, hey, that's our,
The argument that works is to say you're operating from a position of scarcity, but if we move to a position of abundance, you'll get to your work more easily and quicker.
Yeah, I really think that that's one of the things, after being in social venture partners for a while, I think one of the biggest services we can make to the county is to be a convener. And, you know, we got areas of interest in homelessness, and what I always hear is, of course, money's tight now, right? There's silos and there's redundancy in the county around these services, and I really think that it can be done. My wife, who has been involved in the California Women's Foundation, they have built a convening model and kind of changed their strategy to doing that. It's had unbelievable impact, but originally around the table, it was the same thing. You know, you're never going to get them, they won't talk. And they've got these disparate organizations together, and they've gone and done amazing things. And I really think that SVP ought to consider being a convener.
Let me chime in at this point, give Peter a bit of a rest, and say that we're just finishing a piece of research that we're doing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we're doing a research there on a community organization that serves as the backbone or the convener, and indeed they got, and this is all about citizen engagement, voter turnout, and those kinds of outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And our study of this organization revealed a couple of interesting things. For that backbone organization to become effective, it took 6 years. I hate to be the weeds guy all the time, but you would agree, it doesn't happen overnight. It took them 6 years, and it also took a kind of leadership in that organization that was totally committed to collaboration. And that takes time. You don't tell everybody how we're going to collaborate. You have to let it sort of emerge from the group. And it also took an investment from a statewide organization that said, that's the right model for Milwaukee. We're going to give you resources, voter database resources, but also money to help you be an effective backbone or community organization. So it is an option for you to think about doing. You might fund yourselves a backbone organization or create.
one thing Santa Barbara doesn't have, and Indiana was this, that she's been involved in some of the conversation. We do not have a credible intermediary to do a lot of the work that could be done usefully. The best model of an intermediary I know is the New York City Partnership that David Rockefeller started when he was chairman of Chase Bank. That New York City Partnership is well staffed. It does things, economic development, education reform. It can actually be a backbone for all kinds of stuff. So when Henry Kravis raised $100 million for the Millennium Gift to New York City, they had a place to go that could do it. We don't have that here. Santa Barbara Foundation is not in that business. It has a different kind of mandate. The Philanthropy Roundtable is not structured and staffed the way some grant maker associations are. We don't really have that here. And that was an issue with Thrive. We had to find a home for Thrive. We're at the county ed, which is good, but it really in some ways is a compromise. C3H has the same kind of dilemma. Where's it going to go? So I think SVP, an interesting project for SVP would be to try to determine what should that be. What kind of an organization do we need there? So
we have 20 minutes left. And we have one final strategy to present. Are you ready to do that?
sure.
And I'd like to save a few minutes at the end too, just to talk about what happened here this morning and get your feedback and reactions to how it went and what we might do.
Well, let me just talk for a little bit about something that I know is of great interest to a number of SVP partners. and it's the notion of an impact investing, which has really been growing as a concept for a long time from several perspectives. One perspective is from investors. So there are people like Steve Case, the co-founder of AOL, who has a large investment pool that's a for-profit investment pool, but will not invest unless it has a social gain. Piero Omidyar, the founder of eBay, the Omidyar network, a very, very large pool of capital, several $1 billion, invests from a foundation perspective and in a market economy investor perspective, 100% based upon that the money they're investing has some social gain. So there's that pure sort of classical investment perspective. Before that stuff evolved, there was socially screened investments, which represent, I don't know, Seth, I know how much money is under a social screen, which is something a passive thing. I, as an investor, will not invest in companies that pollute, that make armament or make alcohol or whatever. So there has been this sort of evolution from an investment perspective. And then from within the nonprofit world, there have been a growing number of hybrids. The biggest and most well-known is microcredit. There's now microcredit in Silicon Valley. You may have seen that piece in the news press this week. There's microcredit all over the world. It's about $100 billion. People feel they can grow it to double and triple that. So there's that kind of component. And then there is within the nonprofit itself this attempt, can we find revenue? Can we make a business? Can we make a cookie? Can we somehow develop that? And there's some great work being done on that in San Francisco as an organization called REDF, Roberts Economic Development Fund. It's the Roberts from Goldman, Travis and Roberts, run by college adults. And they have really figured out how to go into a nonprofit and analyze, is there income potential here? So from an SVP perspective, that's the most direct shot. Are any of the deals we're working on, is there a potential for income generation? Can they monetize? Can they figure out how to market something? Can they sell something? And can that really help? And then there is another variation on that. I've got what's in my bag? I've got Tom Parker's new book. Hutton Parker, here, as you may know, is a foundation that has 75% of its assets invested in real estate that generates revenue back to the foundation, and he talks about $100 million secret. He's such a good-looking man. He's all over so there's that piece. And then specifically, very interesting, there's lots of innovation going on here. In your packet is a piece called Pay for Success, project update. Social impact bonds or pay for success contracts is a new innovation. There have been about 8 or 9 of these done around the country and around the world. And there's one cooking here in Santa Barbara. And the deal is, in a pay for success project, to find something where you can demonstrate you saved enough money that the county or the government or a foundation will in fact pay you back the money. So the place that the team here, led by Rick Roney, who some of you may know, has been working on this for 2 years in the criminal justice field. And Rick is someone who's passionate about criminal justice, and he's been running a program for juvenile offenders for some years and funding it. And this is where the deal sits. Basically, it would be a deal to fund, the county be able to fund programs with the goal of reducing recidivism. So in the criminal justice world, there's all this tremendous evidence that if you do things in a certain way, the ex-offender will not return to jail. If the ex-offender does not return to jail, the savings is phenomenal. Because to have a person in jail is $50,000 to $70,000 a year. So if you can actually have a program that will reduce that incident, you have saved a ton of money and you have saved a life. So it's like a really, really big deal. In the current environment, the county, no government, has sufficient money to run those kinds of programs. In the current environment, there is not that funding. So the deal that RONI has worked up and has gotten preliminary buy-in from the county, the supervisors heard about it in the last couple of weeks, blessed it. He's got all the right actors involved, the sheriff, the district attorney, the probation people. The idea is that a program will be designed. It will cost, let's say, $3 million to do over 4 years or 3 years. An investor puts up to $4 million. If it doesn't work, he loses his money. She loses her money. If it does work, to a certain degree, the investor is repaid. If it really is a stunning success, the investor can make 18%. So it's a lot of moving pieces. Rick and his team have gotten buy-in from the Santa Barbara Foundation, from the Hutton Foundation, from the Bauer Foundation, from the Fund for Santa Barbara, from some of us. They've got the money to do the planning. It is extremely interesting, very well known. There are people around who know how to issue the bond. Actually, RONI, the term of art has been social impact bonds. RONI thinks that's a fallacious term. It's not a bond. It's a contract. So the whole notion of impact investing is exploding from a relative, and I know that Gary Becker in particular has been someone who's been extremely interested in this concept for some time. How SVP gets engaged in it, or wants to get engaged in, I don't know. But back to our bread and butter business, the notion of looking at our nonprofit client, is there revenue opportunity, and can we help structure it, of which we had an early example of that with the cooking project, is probably where it is. So that's a really very brief.
Excellent.
Very, I apologize. It's not so fast.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
By the way, if you go on Wikipedia, there are now listed here 38 investment funds that are doing impact investing, and it doesn't mention Elios, which is a Santa Barbara-based one. So there are probably 100 out there. And then it mentions another 33 networks of impact investing. So, and Monitor consulting firm feels there's about $50 billion now in this arena, and that it could grow to $300 billion. Did I say billion or million?
You said
50 billion.
wow.
Oh, really, really exciting.
There's at least two species of this. One is the product or service that you sell. The other is a human service intervention that saves money.
Or another kind of intervention that saves money. Could be an environmental one too.
Yeah. And it's some program or some intervention. In this case, you mentioned criminal justice and a way to reduce recidivism. And that gets back to our very first section. What's the theory? What's the program model? I mean, you got to have that, and presumably it generates evidence that this does in fact save X thousand.
The most complicated, the rubber will hit the road on the Pay for Success project here. The rubber will hit the road when the county has to sign off.
They're gonna have to be convinced.
They're gonna have to be convinced that in fact, the savings are.
Comments on impact investing.
I think it's not.
That's fascinating.
Fascinating.
I just,
Are there minimum chips, for example, for the this recidivism thing, that you need to donate a certain amount?
No.
No?
It will only be based upon the design of a program to do X, Y, and Z for these mostly young people, but whatever. And then a set of measurements. And one of the advantages Santa Barbara has is that the Pew Charitable Trust, we're a large foundation, has chosen Santa Barbara County as a site to model a new metric measurement. And that is happening.
On recidivism?
No, not on recidivism, it's just on human service delivery system in general.
Oh.
And Pew has agreed to work with this project to try to make it specific for this. So, very interesting. It could become a national model. Ronnie would be a good SVP partner.
Yes, could you ask him? We've tried. We've tried.
He's his own mini SVP.
so what role do you think we could play in this conversation? And thinking about our investees?
Well, one question to our investees. If you had an investment from X, could you demonstrate savings that would be sufficient to repay?
Or increased revenue.
Or
Increase revenue.
New revenue.
Or could you get to new revenue?
You know what I like about the whole conversation, so I know you didn't ask a question, the whole conversation this morning, come back at the end, toward the very beginning of this very integrated approach of this is an evidence-based outcomes and systems, where organizations can actually prove that they're creating outcomes. Like recidivism is a good one because there's a dollar amount, but other organizations can have similar type of results. Food Bank maybe is on that edge, but if you scale of 1 to 10, how many of our organizations could be within that scale that they could have a linkage to government-funded systems like prisons and so
That
forth.
was what Charles had in mind in the design of this.
Excellent job.
Good job, Charles.
Just sign your evaluation form. Yeah, thanks. I mean, what we've tried to do is give you a set of perspectives or strategies or strategic views, all of which indeed are or can be interrelated. So it's not, it's not an either or for any of those. I guess I would ask, did this work? Is this make you more confused or more frustrated, or is this helping? Our desire is to help you figure out how to be most effective and strategic with your investees.
Could I make a request? You mentioned there's a future session. Something we haven't really talked about is dysfunction within the organization. Now, every organization in the world is dysfunctional in some sense or another. And oftentimes, we're brought into the organization to work on a program or a mission or whatever it is, but really what we spend our time on, looking at you, Seth Peter, is dealing with dysfunction in the organization. Right?
I'm the cause of it.
You're like the poster child for fixing broken organizations. So, really, we're not psychotherapists here, but oftentimes, there's miscommunication between the board and the management and the staff, and even though we think we're coming to do something, we're actually doing some other completely different job, which is facilitating relationships. And John alluded to the relationships between SVP and the investees. That's a multi, many-to-many connection. We have different relationships with the different players there, and they all have relationships with each other. And this all has to be negotiated very carefully, because you're coming into, you're changing the wings on an airplane in flight here, which obviously has to be done very gently. This is something we need to talk about, and maybe, could get some guidance with them.
Sure. Just as an aside, not that this would necessarily be part of a future session, but one of the faculty at Fielding just has published a book that's been getting a wonderful reception, and the title of the book is Yes to the Mess. And
Yes to the mess?
Yes to the Mess. And the point is that in this kind of chaotic scenario that you described, there are enormous potentials for creative, innovative, productive outcomes. So we could take a look at that kind of phenomenon that you're describing and maybe give you help you think through some ways to deal with it more effectively.
It's something that's come out of this for me, and playing devil's advocate here is, SVP is really a complex hybrid of an organization. And coming from another place in the country and being here for only a year, I've found it, almost an impossible structure. And I'm just wondering if it wouldn't make more sense to try to move towards being this convening organization at a much higher level, operating at a much higher level in Santa Barbara than we operate, and forget about getting involved in dysfunction anymore. I mean, is that passing the buck, or is it something we'd be better at? I don't know. It's what makes, it's what came out of it for me.
I mean, if that's...
This is a complex argument.
It's...
We look at the table, look how complicated it all is.
Are you ambivalent?
Well, maybe it's a question we should ask. Seems to me that any one of these topics could be formed of conversation, like I think about all the energy around the collective impact, or the pay for success, the impact investment. Maybe we should think about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, talk amongst yourselves, so to speak, for Joan, to think about this. We're willing to be responsive to what would be most useful to you. And again, I say you, knowing that you're a heterogeneous group, and there are people who are new, and there are people who have been around a while, there are people who are centrally involved, there are people who are at the periphery, there are people who go in and out. Yeah, you're complex. That's probably true of most any organization.
One thing I've been, as most of you know, I've been an absent member. But one thing I've been really aware of, some of the programming SVP puts on is excellent. And I've always felt there should be more people in the room. There should be others from the Santa Barbara Donor Advised Fund world, or even other donors that would also be good market. I even tried to sell Michelle and Joan on inviting other people to come here for this, just as a marketing
Well, I think what we've tried to do is be thought-provoking. We've done that, and help you be more self-reflective. And we're more than willing to stay in touch with you and with Joan about how to continue to be effective with you in the future. And thank everybody for taking your precious 2 hours and showing up on the show.
Well, on behalf of SVP, I would like to thank all of you. Number one, Charles and Peter and Katrina for designing this for us, and for all of you for showing up. And we are, as David's metaphor so eloquently addressed, we are in SVP trying to redesign the airplane as we're flying it too, so that for SVP. So I think that we are betwixt and between a way of being and doing and trying to find the next step too, in a newer way of being and doing, while not letting go of the past.
Great. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.